My presentation today is in the demon Kabandha in visual art and mythology. So, a vast array of myths have been in circulation in almost every human society from time immemorial. And Spence has defined mythology as the science of primitive man, his manner of explaining the universe. Hence, myths have vital information embedded within itself that is necessary for understanding the individual and the society in its traditional settings. Nature constitutes both forces or events that are favorable and unfavorable to him. The unexplained and unfavorable phenomena that were perceived beyond human control and understandings were categorized as evil. Mythology is not just limited to the study of religion, gods, and benevolent beings, but also malevolent beings and the concept of evil. Evil and demon are almost inseparable terms, and evil, be it an abstract idea or an entity, is defined by Theresa Bain as evil often employs minions to do its bidding, and these minions are considered to be as demons. In a vast country like India, with legends and myths popping out around each corner, it is rather unsurprising that India is as true with innumerable number of demons. As Nandita Krishna has put forward in her book, The Book of Demons, each state, village, caste, community, and tribe have its own myths and legends to account for the vast range of demons. Even though a plethora of demons such as Buddhas, Pretas, Pishaches, etc. are prevalent in the mythology of India, evil in Indian context is often associated with two cardinal entities, the Asuras and Rakshasas. So we'll have to examine in a brief manner the concept of Asura and Rakshasa before moving on to the core of the presentation. So first, we'll examine the concept of Asura. The etymological roots of the word Asura has been traced back to the root word Asu, which means life of the spiritual world. And this has been traced back by Sir Monia Williams. And there has been varied opinions on the nature and development of the term Asura in ancient Indian literature. A few scholars trace the origin back to the Ahuras of the pre-Zoroastrian era, yet others mention a probability of an Assyrian origin for Asura. Asko Parpola has suggested a proto-Uralic history, but others like Edward Wash Hale, Sir Monia Williams, Rudolf Otto, P.L. Bhargav, etc., were of the opinion that the term Asura initially did not have a negative connotation, and they have their different views set across for this theory. In the family books of the Rig Veda, the term Asura appears for a total of 25 times as the epithets of Agni, Savitar, Varuna, Mitravarna, etc. And many of these entities are elsewhere inside the Rig Veda itself called as Devas. The term Asura is also used in association with humans 4 different times. And also to point out some specific usages in the verses of Rig Veda, such as the usage of Asura of gods, Asura of people, Asura of wise ones, and the Asura of heaven. These usages sort of point out or characterize genitives of rulership. As Edward Bush Hale has also pointed out that the term Asura has not yet been used in the plural sense in the Rig Veda, but only has appeared in the singular sense in the family books of the Rig Veda. That is, these factors led to scholars like Monia Williams, Edward Bush Hale, and H.H. Wilson to suggest a translation of Lord for the term Asura. But as we move on, we can see in the books of the books 1, 8, 9, and 10 of the Rig Veda, which are considered to be a later interpolation, the term Asura continues to be used as epithets of Agni, Varuna, Indra, Soma, etc. But certain verses start to use a negative connotation. Most probably, the use of the term Asura as an epithet for human enemies might have contributed to this change in the meaning of the word. By the time of the composition of the Atharva Veda, the term Asura took on a wide spectrum of meanings, including supernatural and human enemies, enemies who oppose all gods, and even the meaning of an anti-god. Several verses where Asura is used, Dasa and Dasiyu can be seen and substituted without even altering the meaning, is the opinion put forward by Edward Bush Hale. By the time of composition of Brahmanas and later Hindu literature, it becomes even different and significant. The word has come to be used exclusively to indicate a class of beings who are opposed to gods, and Asuras were frequently associated with inauspicious things and dark things. They were engaged in constant battle. They were depicted as engaged in constant battle with the gods and were subdued due to their own misdeeds. The term Asura and Rakshasa began to be used interchangeably. We'll look at Rakshasa in a moment's time, but the term Asura and Rakshasa began to be used interchangeably towards the later period. The recurrent occurrences of the compound word Asura Rakshasa in these Brahmanas, namely the Jaimini Brahmana, the Kaushitaki Brahmana, and the Aitreya Brahmana, is significant because they sort of merge the concept of Asura and Rakshasa into a single entity. These transpositions and resemblances in characteristics demonstrate a tendency for Asuras and Rakshasas to be portrayed more like one another. Towards the Puranas, in the Puranas, the Brahmanda Purana and Vishnu Purana states that the word Asura was used for Daityas due to their rejection of Varuni, who came out from the ocean of milk. So there are varied depictions and varied narrations about how the term Asura is used. We'll briefly skim through the next entity, moving on to the next entity, that is the Rakshasas. But unlike the term Asura, the Rakshasas were always considered as evil beings. Of a chief part of the verses consisting or mentioning the Rakshasas in the Rig Veda, a deity is urged to kill them or offer protection from them. Agni, Indra, Soma, Brihaspati, etc. are the major deities that are called upon to do the bidding, either to kill the Rakshasa or offer protection from them. In the Rig Veda, Rakshasas are described as a force with hexing power sent by a sorcerer to inflict harm on another person. Rakshasas are portrayed as beings who are tricky. They are associated with diseases, namely plagues, and they are in opposition with the sense of deceitful speech. Evil, repulsive, greedy, tricky, and Maya possessing are some of the terms that are used to describe the characteristics of the Rakshasas. Rakshasas are also attributed with the ability to shapeshift. This is important because the Rakshasas usually use this ability, they utilize this ability to disrupt sacrifices in the literatures. The Uttarakanda of Ramayana also narrates a story about the creation of the Rakshasas, but I'm not currently going into detail about the creation of the story of the creation of the Rakshasas. Consequently, the Rakshasas are always considered as enemies of the sacred chant, always malevolent, and one that needs to be gotten rid of inevitably. Now, since we have looked into the concepts of both the cardinal entities of evil in India, that is the Asura and Rakshasa, we'll be moving on to the core of the presentation. That is about the demon or the Rakshasa Kabandha. According to Sanskrit dictionaries, the term Kabandha literally means a headless torso. As the term refers, Kabandha is a Rakshasa portrayed with a headless torso in the mythology. The narrative of Kabandha is mainly provided in Ramayana and various versions of it, such as the Valmiki Ramayana, Kamba Ramayana, and the Adhyatma Ramayana. It also occurs in Mahabharata and several later literary works that are either adaptations or the works are based on the following literary works. The works are either based on Ramayana and the stories related with Ramayana. So these are the following literary works that refer to Kabandha. Valmiki Ramayana, Kamba Ramayana, and Adhyatma Ramayana refer to Kabandha. And outside of the Ramayana, Mahabharata, the Raghuvamsha, Bhattikavya, Mahavira Charita, the Anargha Raghava, and the Ramacharita also describes about the Rakshasa Kabandha. So the tale of Kabandha is one of extreme importance as he is the one who directs Rama to form an alliance with Sugriva in the story of Ramayana. Various versions or various literary works have different versions with slight variations in the narration of the story of Kabandha. The episode is, as I said, is depicted with a slight variation in each of the sources. So we'll quickly skim through the sources and I'll point out the sources, the literary works that have given us a slightly more differentiated variation of the story. So the story as it in the crust remains the same through all these sources. The core of the story remains that while Rama and Lakshmana were searching for Sita after the funeral of Jadayu, they encounter Kabandha, who is described to be a headless demon with his face and his torso. Kabandha is revealed to have originally been a Gandharva who was cursed by a sage, and the name of the sage varies in different sources. In the Valmiki Ramayana, it is the sage Stulasiras who curses Kabandha, while in the Kamba Ramayana, in the Adhyatma Ramayana, it is Ashtavakra who curses Kabandha. So moving on, the Kabandha is also said to have opposed Indra, who by virtue of whose thunderbolt his head sank into his torso and he was left with over elongated arms and a face in his torso to sustain for the rest of his life. He was granted an exemption that when Rama comes to him and kills him, he would get purified from his curse. Only the Mahavira Charita gives a slightly differential narration about the story of Kabandha. The Mahavira Charita actually states that Rama had never seen Kabandha. Instead, while Rama and Lakshmana were wandering through the forest in search of Sita, they happened to hear the voice of Sramana, a lady who was shouting for help from a headless demon. So Rama asks Lakshmana to go and help Sramana and help her get freed from the clutches of Kabandha. So Lakshmana actually defeats Kabandha and comes back to Rama, who asks about the demon, and Lakshmana starts narrating about the features of the demon or how the demon looks according to him. At the end of the story, on attaining purity from his curse, he inevitably directs the brothers, the sons of Dasharatha, on to Shabari or Sugriva, according to different sources, and on their journey forward. So the story of Kabandha is one of extreme importance in the Ramayana. Since we have looked through the stories and tales that mention literary sources that mention the tales of Kabandha, now we'll move on to the iconic features. How each literary work has depicted the demon Kabandha. We'll look into that. Various literary works prescribe slightly differentiated iconic features for describing Kabandha, but almost all the sources prescribe a few common features. And these are Kabandha, the Rakshasa, is to be depicted without a head. He has to have his mouth affixed to the stomach. He has to be depicted with long and extendable arms. And he also needs to have massive and ferocious teeth. Other literary works, in addition to the common features that are mentioned here, they often supply us with supplementary information. And I have classified and summarized these supplementary information, and we'll quickly go through all the supplementary information that are provided by various sources. So the Valmiki Ramayana says that the demon Kabandha is to be depicted covered with horripilate thick and horripilate hair. Three different sources talks about the eyes of Kabandha. It is important because the Valmiki Ramayana narrates that the demon Kabandha is characterized with a single eye. On the other hand, the Kamba Ramayana talks about the eyes, a pair of eyes of Kabandha, which invokes a resemblance to the sun as being pasted upon the Meru mountain. The Adhyatma Ramayana differs from both these previous sources and says that the demon Kabandha is devoid of any eyes. Most of the sources talk about how massive the mouth of Kabandha is. And in addition to that, some of the sources provide us with information regarding the teeth of Kabandha. The Valmiki Ramayana, the Kamba Ramayana, and the Mahavira Charita gives us information related to the teeth of Kabandha and says that they were massive and saw-like teeth of Kabandha. This was probably a way to characterize the demon in a more ferocious manner. Only the Mahavira Charita, as I said earlier, the Mahavira Charita gives a slightly differentiated story. The Mahavira Charita is the only literary work that portrays a beard for the demon, and the beard is said to be bushy and wet with the blood of the beasts that he has previously devoured. And the specific features such as body and the complexion of the Rakshasa has been provided by the Valmiki Ramayana and the Kamba Ramayana, which states that the demon was overly grown and looked like a mountain. The Valmiki Ramayana and the Kamba Ramayana also comments on the complexion or the color of the demon as black, and even goes to the Kamba Ramayana even goes to an extent of comparing the demon with halahala poison. And the additional specific features such as Kabandha being described as a never hungry demon who is ceaselessly devouring beasts of the forest, animals such as tigers, elephants, and huge beasts, birds, etc. These specific features are done in order to enhance and render the perspective of a terrific, vicious, and ferocious Rakshasa. In addition to the description of Kabandha as a demon, the Valmiki Ramayana also provides us with a descriptive narrative of the Kabandha as a Gandharva after attaining his original form. So the Valmiki Ramayana in the verse 4 to 6 in the Aranya Kanda says that the Gandharva version of the demon Kabandha is to be attired in untarnished vestments and angelic garlands. He is to be depicted irradiant with unsullied clothing and is to be decorated with fineries on every limb, that is Sarva Pratyanga Bhushana. Seated on it, and he is to be seated on a dazzling aircraft, which is yoked with swans. So since we have looked through the iconic features that is mentioned through various literary sources, and we have made a brief survey of the literary sources, now I will move on to the demon Kabandha as we have obtained and as it is depicted in the sculptures of Kerala. So the first example I'm providing to you of the depiction of demon Kabandha is from the Ramaswamy temple in Padmanabhuram. The image of Kabandha here is ferociously depicted, and it is part of a Ramayana panel. As you can see, the demon is depicted as headless with two bulging eyes and a massive nose. An expansive mouth is depicted with a set of jagged teeth, and the canines are depicted as massive and protruding out. The arms are also depicted as over elongated, and the demon is adorned with keyuras on both of these hands. A single hara and grivas adorn the chest of the demon. Rama and Lakshmana are depicted as severing the hands of the demon. And if you take a close look towards the inside the mouth of the Kabandha, we can see the depiction of animals such as an elephant, a tiger, etc., which signifies the beasts that he had devoured. As mentioned in the ancient literature, that he was a ever-hungry demon who ceaselessly devoured on beasts. Moving on to the second representation. This is rather a quite unique representation of the demon Kabandha. The miniature seating bracket of the demon and simultaneously in his original Gandharva form. So we'll look into both the features of the Gandharva and the demon Kabandha. First, we'll look into the features of the demon Kabandha. The demon here is depicted as a headless figure with a pair of bulging and rapacious eyes and a massive nose. Here, as seen in the last example, an expansive mouth with a set of jagged teeth and a set of protruding canines and an obtruding tongue is also depicted. He is also seen with a pair of elongated hands, but the demon here is devoid of any ornaments on these hands. Now moving on to the features of the Gandharva that is simultaneously depicted along with the demon. This Gandharva is the one that I mentioned earlier, that the demon attains a form after purification of his sins or purification of his curse by Rama. So the Gandharva is depicted with a Kirida Maguda with lateral expansion. The ears of the Gandharva are adorned with Nritta Kundalas. Twin Kanganas, Keyuras, and Bhujagavalayam decorate the hands of the figure as it is seen. Decorated grivas, haras, udharabandha, and an open vanamala embellish the torso of the figure. The hip of the Gandharva is emblazoned with the Kadi Sutra, and the lower garment is decorated with sash, tassels, and loops. All these features or all these descriptive that is put into the sculpture, it gives justice to the previously mentioned source in the Valmiki Ramayana that the Gandharva is embellished with all sort of ornaments over all parts of his body. That is what I have mentioned earlier, Sarva Pratyanga Bhushana. The Gandharva here is portrayed in a Samabhanga Sthanaka with hands folded over his head in Anjali Mudra. The rounded face, as you can see here, the rounded face, the protruding belly, and the laterally expanded Kirida Mudra exhibit the characteristic features of the Kerala style. Moving on to the next depiction, this is from Tirunakara Mahadeva temple, and this image is a part of the Ramayana panel of the Kootambala, and only the bust of the demon is depicted here. In opposition to the other examples that we have previously seen, and in opposition to the ancient prescribed literature, the demon here is described as a headed figure in contrast to the ancient literature. And the head of the demon is adorned with the Karanda Mukta with horns projecting out from either side. And the demon is depicted with a pair of bulging eyes, a huge mouth with jagged teeth, and protruding canines. The ears of the demon are adorned with Vritta Kundalas. So this peculiar example is in opposition to the other depictions of the demon Kabandha, and is even in opposition to the literal meaning of the term Kabandha, which says a headless demon. The next example that I'm providing to you is from the Sri Krishna temple, Chovara. This image or this figure is a part of the Belikalpura of the Sri Krishna temple, and the figure is slightly broken in half. So much of the features cannot be discerned from the figure. Here, the Kabandha is depicted as a headless figure with a pair of elongated arms, that are reaching out. A face with a pair of eyes, a massive nose and mouth are also depicted, and the remaining features are not observable due to the damage incurred to the figure. The final example that I'm putting forward to you is from the Chapparandatta Bhagavati temple at Panapura. And the ceiling of the Vadil Madam at the Chapparandatta Bhagavati temple is beautifully portrayed with scenes from the Ramayana, as opposed to other depictions where both Rama and Lakshmana are seen as cleaving out or severing the hands of Kabandha. Here, Rama single-handedly or alone slays the demon, and the features shows that the demon is depicted again as a headless one with a massive torso. He is also portrayed with thick corpulate hair, as mentioned in the Valmiki Ramayana. As I previously mentioned, the other sculptures do not represent Kabandha with thick corpulate hair, as mentioned in the Valmiki Ramayana. A pair of bulging eyes, a massive nose, a mustache, and an expansive mouth with protruding canines and a set of jagged teeth are also depicted. The lower part of the figure, as you can see, is adorned, and the elongated arms are seen to be cleaved off, and the hands are adorned with double kanganas. So these are the examples that I wish to provide in front of you for the depiction of the demon Kabandha in the sculptural art of Kerala. It is not just Kabandha, but there are also other headless beings from different parallel mythologies. The Greek mythology makes a mention of the Achyphaloi, or it is otherwise known as Blemmy, or otherwise it is also known as Epiphangy. Herodotus makes a mention of the Epiphagy or the Achyphaloi, and is also later mentioned by Pliny the Elder. There is also another parallel which can be drawn from the Chinese mythology of Xingqiang, who is a person, who is an entity who is decapitated during a fight against a supreme divinity. But he in turn transforms his nipples and his belly button into his eyes and mouth respectively, and sustains for the rest of his life. And here he is depicted as holding a shield and a battle axe. And again, another example from the Japanese mythology is that of Yokai Donotsura. So that is also a headless figure that is associated with the Japanese mythology. I couldn't find, or rather there aren't any stories that pertains to the Yokai Donotsura, but it is a common depiction in the yokai scrolls of Japan. As concluding remarks, I would like to say that mythology is a predominant facet in understanding the development of an individual, the society, and the thought processes associated with it. Evil in myths are often manifested from the personification of unexplainable and uncontrollable phenomena and events in nature that impact humans. Asura and Rakshasa, the two predominant entities of evil, the former of which is suggestive of having undergone a change in the usage of the word rather than in the nature of a group of beings, while the latter was always associated with demonic or evil forces. So Kabandha is one such Rakshasa who is forced to live a demonic life owing to a curse and attains emancipation at the hands of the sons of Dasharatha. The Rakshasa plays an indispensable part in Ramayana, and it is he who directs Rama and Lakshmana on the path forward to locate Sita. In the sculptural art of Kerala, the episode of Kabandha is found as a part of the Ramayana panel, mostly on the ceiling friezes of the Namaskara Mandapa, the Koothambala, Velikalpura, Vadil Madam, etc. A majority of the figures, as we have previously seen, is depicted headless, but a few figures are also depicted as the Rakshasa having a head. And there are simultaneous depictions of unique figures such as the Rakshasa being depicted in his Rakshasa form and in the Gandharva form, as we have seen from the Tiruvangade Ramaswamy temple example. So with this, I conclude my presentation. I'd like to thank each and everyone for listening patiently to my presentation, the organizers for helping me to present this presentation during the session. And I'd also like to thank my teachers, my parents, and my friends for wholeheartedly supporting me through all of my endeavors. Thank you.